أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنة إلى يوم الدين. All praises are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may the peace and blessings be upon His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and on all of those who follow the path of righteousness until the last day. My dear Ilm Summiters, sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shaykh Qazi, our beloved Shaykh and our teacher, has requested that I talk about Muslims in China. Now I want you to understand one thing. I am not a field anthropologist. I did not study or do a PhD in China. I had the pleasure and blessing of going to China about 2.5 years ago. I spent 2.5 weeks there and visited 6 provinces. So from that, I visited a lot of masajids and met a lot of imams and have actual live interviews, inshallah, at the end of the talk. But I want to make some disclaimers in the beginning that it's impossible for me to cover all of China in an hour or so. And if those of you who came to Summit last year, Sheikh Birges presented a whole talk at Al-Andalus, took 8 hours of intensive detail. I've really tried to simplify it for you by giving you a handout. Everyone should have a handout. If you don't, please let me know. We can get one out to you. That pretty much summarizes everything. You've been brain overloaded. You've been sponged up. I don't want you to take any notes. Just relax, sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight, okay? So inshallah, I'm going to start now. And just bear with me. I've never given this talk before. I actually finished this talk at the time of the adhan of Maghrib. So just bear with me. I have video footage as well, but I need to do it manually. So if you can bear with me, inshallah ta'ala, I think it will be beneficial for you. And that's the main purpose why we're here in Ilm Summit, to enjoy and to connect with our brothers and sisters in China. And I learned a lot, so hopefully you will too. Bismillah. So I'm going to start by showing you some of the pictures I took. These are all of my own pictures when I was in China. And so I want to start by giving you a background history. The first part of my talk is purely academic, to give you the background as to what's happening in China, how did Islam come to China, what happened through the stages in China until the current era, what is the current status of Muslims in China. And then I want to use that background in the context of my videos that I'm going to show you. It's purely an academic talk. This doesn't have my Google Gaga pictures and smiles with me and my family, okay? Bismillah. So why should we study about Muslims in China? A number of reasons. The first reason is the visit. The first visit was sent by the Arabs. The emissaries were sent by Khalif Uthman in 651 Christian era. And it's an unusual history, you have to understand. The Muslims have been indigenous in China for 1,300 years. That was a big eye-opener for me. And in fact, the number of Muslims in China outnumber the number of Muslims in Malaysia. In fact, every Arab country except Egypt. Go Egypt. The People's Republic of China, they came out with an official consensus, and it's on your handout, that of the 55 minorities, there's a little handout on the top right-hand corner of your handout that comprises 10 of those 55 minorities are Muslim. Allahu Akbar. 10 minorities of the 55 minorities in China are Muslim. What does that mean? It's a heterogeneous group. You cannot say Chinese Muslims. It's insulting because among those Muslims, you have a wide variety of Muslims of different ethnic backgrounds. So the lump sum of Chinese Muslims is an erroneous statement to make in academics. In fact, they have been declared one of the 5 great races. If you ever look at the flag of China, it has 5 stars. One of those 5 stars refers to the Hui Muslims. They actually are recognized on the national flag of China. So when you look at the flag of China anytime, you'll see one of those 5 stars indicates the representation and acknowledgement of a minority of Muslims called the Hui Muslims. In fact, they make up 2% of the population of all of China, which is approximately 20 million. Depending who you read, it could be 20 million to 50 million. And therefore, to study China's Muslims is actually to study China's own history, because they've been there for 1,300 years. This is a handout. We talk about gem boards. Well, I gave it to you. Okay, it's all there. All right, you have no notes to take. Everything I'm going to discuss is basically worked off on this. I personally put it together myself. And because Islam is beautiful, I beautified the handout for you, so you can appreciate it. Hopefully you won't throw it out. Okay? And share this information with others about Muslims in China, because you need to know about it. This is part of our ummah. Let's begin. Bismillah. XY factor. It is not a sexist statement, my dear brothers and sisters. XY factor I mentioned because here's China. I don't have a pointer here. I don't know unless this works. The red one? Okay. So the XY refers to Xinjiang, which is in the northwest province of China. Here's the whole outline of China here, okay? This is the most northwest part of China called Xinjiang. And you have Yunnan, XY. These are very important historically for Muslims, and you'll see why. That's why I brought it to your attention. But this is where Beijing is, and here's where Xinjiang is. A peculiarity about China is that the national standard time is Beijing time. So that means if you fly from New York to California, California time is New York time. Can you believe that? So when it's sunset and midnight in Beijing, it could still be daylight hours in Xinjiang. That's the whole thing with the Communist Party. They want everything in standard time. It's called communist time, right? So here is the distribution. So if you look carefully at this map over here, certain areas will light up for you, and you'll see where the Muslim minorities are listed in your handout. So if you look over here, here's some of the provinces. Xinjiang has over 50% of the people are Muslim. And it's a significant, historically, which we'll talk about a little later. Also, Gansu, Ningxia, Yunnan have Muslim significant numbers. But understand one thing, in every major city, in every province, there are Muslims throughout. The Hui Muslims are every corner of this population of Chinese. So Muslims are here, but these are significant pockets where there are autonomous regions of a lot of Muslims living over there. How did they get there historically? We're going to talk about that. So how did the Muslim population increase in China? How do you get these 20 million Muslims? Well, first it started with traders. They settled along the coastal regions. Military assistance, we'll talk about that as well. Soldiers provided their own barracks by the Chinese government to settle down, and mosques were built in those enclaves. This planted the seeds of Islam in China. And in fact, they were allowed to even marry the Han's Chinese women and introduce, so the Chinese women who came into the lives of these Arab, Persian, Muslim traders introduced the language and culture to the people, to the Muslims. The offspring of the Han's Muslim blood then married within their own enclaves or communities. And therefore, this is the birth of Muslims in China. So here's this quick map here about the Arab trade and sea routes. We hear a lot about the Silk Road. That basically refers to roads that are crossed by land treacherously throughout the areas of Central Asia and China, all the way through Europe. It actually refers to a Chinese textile flow from Asia, Middle East, and Europe. So it's a way of communication by trade. The start of Islam actually starts, this Silk Road actually starts from Xi'an, which is called Xinjiang. I think you can appreciate it over there. Xi'an. I visited that place, all the way to Istanbul. Okay? And this was the vector of spread of Islam into China from Central Asia. In pre-Islam, before anything happened, merchants used to ship goods from one city trade center to another. And one of them is Kashgar in Xinjiang. And that's an important Muslim hallmark as well as Samarkand, but that's obviously in Central Asia. We're not going to talk about that. The Arab maritime main route starts at Canton, passes through the Southeast Asia, Indian Ocean, Red Sea to Alexandria. Pretty much this whole red line is the Silk Road over here. The Mongols actually controlled China and Central Asia and supported this trade route, which is very important for them. So here's another way of looking at it. And you can see that all of this color here, the Tang Dynasty is where we're going to start. That's in your handout. The Tang Dynasty is where the merger or birth or marriage between Chinese and Islam occurs in the history of the Muslims in China. This China proper in the 8th century, and you can see the Silk Route over here, and you can also see the sea routes, which we're going to briefly talk about, how Islam came to them. So let's begin. Bismillah. The Tang Dynasty. 651, Muslims sent by Uthman arrived to the court of the Tang Emperor. And the earliest communities after that descended from the Arabs, Persians, Central Asians, and Mongolian merchants. Already you can see quite a diverse ethnicity that ended up in China. So to use the term Chinese Muslims, again, is inappropriate. The foreign merchants were allowed to settle along the south coast, and they were there from the 7th to the 10th century. So they were pretty much isolated within themselves, and they were allowed to be there because the trade was great. The economic impact on this Tang Dynasty was significant. A lot of merchants were going back and forth. Again, intermarriage occurred with the Han's female children raised as Sunni Muslim. In 1742, the first masjid was built in Xi'an, according to the Chinese records. And therefore, we have a union of two great civilizations in holy marriage. The golden age of Tang Dynasty actually corresponded with the growth and spread of Islam into Central Asia. Just about 30 or 40 years after Rasulullah went from Mecca to Medina in Hijrah. So it was very close. The rising of Islam and the golden era of Tang Dynasty formed a merger. So, a famous battle happened in 713 Christian era called the Battle of Talas. The Muslim army ran into the Chinese army of the Tang Dynasty, and they defeated the forces at the Talas River because the Tang army wanted to expand the dynasty into Central Asia, but they were stopped by the Muslims. What is the significance of this? And we'll come back to this. Number one, it prevented and curbed the expansion of the Tang Dynasty, so we're limited. You can't go any further. Number two, It was a time and birth of the Muslim dominance in Central Asia. Even Buddhism was completely replaced by Islam over the centuries. It also served as an entry point at this area of the Talas River for the spread of Muslims into China. The Caliph Abu Ja'far was called upon by the Chinese emperor of the Tang Dynasty at that time to suppress a Lushan uprising. And so he sent, depending on which report you read, thousands of troops to reinforce the Tang army, and he suppressed that uprising. And in response to that, they were given a benefit, or they were allowed to settle. The barracks were made for the army, masajids were built for the army, and intermarriage with Han females occurred. So the first way of entry was through the trade, and second was through actually supporting the military and their families. So today the Hui, if you look in northwest and southwest regions, regard the Muslim soldiers as their ancestors. Very important. So look at this map over very carefully. This is the Islamic area of influence in green, and you can see the light green here represents the Tang Dynasty. And here's the Talas River right there. So China was trying to spread into Central Asia, but it was stopped and halted right over here by the Muslim army. There was no real war with the Muslims and Chinese. It just stopped there and delimited them from going any further. Here's another view of looking at the various outlines of the Tang Dynasty. Then you have the Song Dynasty. So trade was good. Things were good for the Muslims. They were still a minority at this point. And you can see the Song Dynasty in the dotted line kind of shrunk it down a little bit. They lost this land, and it shrunk even further. We'll talk about it. Here are the trade routes again that we talked about. So how did the Muslim population increase in China? Some of the people accuse that the Muslims forced the Han's Chinese, which is a common non-Muslim Chinese called the Han's Chinese, H-A-N-S, in converting them. That is not true. Actually, Drew Gladney in his book in 2003 says, I never met a Han, because he did a lot of fieldwork for almost 10 years there. I never met a Han who converted to Islam without having been married to a Hui, which is a Chinese Muslim, or adopted into a Hui family. Islam in China, for the most part, has grown biologically through birth and intermarriage. So it's false to accuse that Islam spread by the sword. Same old accusation, see again. So this goes against the false notion of mass, hands-forced conversion in Islam. That didn't happen. I found an article, interestingly, and I want to thank Mary Beth, who really helped me out of my university work where I work in the University of Rochester. She compiled all these academic articles from sheer academic librarians. I really thank her for helping me find the articles for this. So in the Human Genetics Journal, I was very interested to find that there was a study done in the genome to look at the genetic makeup, was investigated by of 3 Muslim minorities, the 3 of the 10 that I have listed in your paper, the Salar, the Bowen, and Danxiang. Most of them speak Mongolian. And in the context of the historical perspective, the study provided evidence of actual intermarriage between genetically diverse male founders who came from Persia and came from Central Asia and Arab countries of each community, and hence Chinese females with subsequent community intermarriage within it. So there is an actual genetic basis to prove the origin of these diverse males with Han's Chinese female. That was very interesting. Here's the Song Dynasty. Its history is divided into 2 distinct periods. It has a northern and southern. Northern is the whole area, and then it was lost to another dynasty group called the Jin, and they took over, not the Jin that we know of. I must be killing these terms in Chinese, or Jin. So this was pretty much lost, and you had the southern Song. And this is the outline. Again, there was stability. The Muslims were living there. They were still continuing to trade and do economic benefit for China. So another way of looking at it, here's Jin again, or Shin, on the top, and you have the Song at the bottom. And then Kublai Khan comes along. It's a whole story, and I can't get into that. It's a whole story about Mongolia. The Mongols, they were vicious. They were warriors. They had no feel for human beings' life and sanctity. They just killed whatever came in their way. They destroyed a lot of property. Imagine the nomads of Mongolia, such a small country, achieved what the Christian crusades could not achieve in hundreds of years in 40 years. Think about that. It's amazing. A small nomadic group that's not even the size of China. And I can try to find you. I'm going to go back here for a second because it's so important. Just bear with me here. Look at Mongolia. Look how small it is. Look at China. This small nomadic backward nation destroyed all of this and took all of it. They did it in 40 years what the Crusades could not do of the Muslim Central Asia in almost centuries. Interesting piece of information. So Kublai Khan came along, and then what happened is a very unique point now. Remember, the traders came, the people came by sea routes, the initial birth of Islam, they're living there along the coast, and now you have a second wave or a big, massive wave, or I call it third wave in your handout, because they just sacked Baghdad in 1258. They destroyed it. They destroyed a lot of Muslim Islamic centers of learning, including Baghdad. So it was a massive migration. Imagine all these Muslims from Central Asia are running down into China. They're getting away from these killers. And so they were fleeing from tyranny from these horse warriors who were just killing them left and right. So what interestingly happened is a change of events. As you know, over time, the Mongolians actually became Muslim. And they appointed 9 Chinese to the administrative posts, governmental posts, astronomy, the astronomy reading center, etc., were Muslim. So they actually enjoyed prestige at this time. Amazing how change of events can happen. Although they destroyed Muslims, this actually helped spread Islam and actually took over most of China. The Muslims were given citizenship of the Han Chinese, and the Han Chinese did not like that. They said, what is this? We're second-class citizens. These guys are 2% of the minority. So there are many, many figures I can't go into, but they were there. The less fortunate Muslims, however, many of them, they formed Chinese clan villages. They built communities, again, around masajids. So there's another point of entry of a massive inflow of Muslims. And they were severed now from their homelands because they can't go back. It was estimated there are about 2 million Muslims, and they're doubled to 4 million at this point. So here's the Mongol Empire of Kublai Khan, quite significant, going all the way through Central Asia, even parts of Arabia, up the Mediterranean to Europe, near Venice. So significant expansion of this dynasty. Another way of looking at the same thing at this time period. And again, you could look at the Yuan dynasty and current China today. Pretty close to what they had. It's quite significant. But don't forget, this is Mongolia. Mongolia is independent. So the Yuan dynasty is actually bigger than what China is today. Qing Dynasty is the next one. After Tang Dynasty comes the Ming Dynasty. Ethnic minorities at this time were required to learn Chinese customs. Another important point I want to bring home to you. From the time of the Tang Dynasty and the Song Dynasty, Muslims were considered foreign elements. They lived in their own enclaves. They lived in their own communities. They were not allowed to interact much with the Chinese proper community. So in other words, they maintained the Arab language. They were learning Quran. They were imams. They were masajids. But now something happened. When the Ming Dynasty took over Kublai Khan, they said, no more. You're a Muslim minority, but I will let you live here on one condition, that you obey our rules, you learn Chinese, you wear Chinese dress, you learn how to use chopsticks, speak our language, and they will recognize you. So the emperor actually gave them the right to exist. And that's an important lesson here. Not everybody who's your enemy is going to kill you. They actually accommodated the Muslim minority, despite all that happened during the Yuan dynasty, and they actually allowed them to hang out there. But what's the main issue here? A very important critical issue in the history of China is the process of Sinicization, making them Chinese-like. So what does that mean? There's a danger of losing Islam. It's a very important point in the history of China, of Muslims. They're in danger of losing Islam because now they have to learn everything in Chinese. Your food, your clothing, your how you behave yourself, your chopsticks, and so forth. You can have your massages, no problem. But there was a blessing. Again, I mentioned, the blessing is they were not required to give up their Islam. The emperor was nice enough. He said, you can hold your Islam, and they were recognized as the official minority, the great religion, okay, the pure religion of China. And the irony again, they allowed the Muslims to prosper again. They assigned Muslims. One of them was Zheng He, which I'll talk about. But the irony is that they had control and wealth, and they had naval power, yet they did not expand their dynasty. I can't explain. It's a history. I'm just explaining it to you. They had naval power. They had wealth, but they did not expand their dynasty. They became xenophobic. So the court actually expelled all foreign missions and became xenophobic. What does that mean? This is a very important point. Look at the number of centuries here. It's significant, almost 300 plus years, in which the Hui Muslims were cut off from the outside world forever. No more. Land routes, trade routes, no, nothing. For hundreds of years, isolated from their roots. Think about it. Think about Ahl Rai and how they didn't have all the hadith with them and all the other information to make decisions. These Muslims were now within themselves, almost like an Al-Andalus in a way. They were cut off from the outside. They had to make their own decisions. So before you go and say, oh, these are Sufis, or they have philosophy, ideology, or they're backward Muslims, you must take into context, when you talk about Chinese Muslims, not what's happening locally in a given province or within a given county, but what's happening in the world and what's happening within. You cannot separate the two. And clearly, they were cut off from the outside world, but yet, subhanAllah, they've maintained their Islam. That's the beauty. So here's the Mongol Ming Dynasty. Again, you can see it didn't really expand much. They were sort of xenophobic, and they held themselves within this territory. And then subsequently, the Qing Dynasty came. I must be killing these words. Oh, Qing, I don't know how you pronounce this. Qing. Qing Dynasty. Much more expansive, actually built more. And here the Manchus, they were non-Hans, non-Muslim, but they were a minority group, one of the minority groups of the 55. They installed their own dynasty. They broadened the borders, expanding westward, as you can see over here, much bigger than the Ming Dynasty. They employed Chinese officials, not Hui Muslims, not Muslims that were non-Chinese, right? They suffered a lot of discrimination, and it was a difficult time for them. They're completely isolated from the outside world, but yet they suffered a lot of discrimination. They were not given proper employment, and there's a whole history behind that. And interestingly, at this time, there's a lot of internal feuding going on. Some people thought the Muslims were rebelling to the new government, but yet from some of the sources that I read in my readings, there's feuding between Muslims and tariqas and Sufi groups for power and position. They were differing about who will have the local power. And many uprisings and killings happened in that XY factor, remember? A lot of killings in Xinjiang and Yunnan. And you can see in your columns under the Qing Dynasty. Many killings. Thousands upon thousands of Muslims were slaughtered. And then Sun Yat-sen rebellion in 1911 brought about a change. The Communist Party formed in 1921. That, in a nutshell, is all of China in 20 minutes. Let's talk about torchbearers. Chinese Muslim torchbearers. I wanted to share that with you. And I won't go into detail like Sheikh Walid, okay? Just want to give you some. But I'm not going to talk about the Wang Daiyu. He was the first Muslim to translate Quran from Arabic to Chinese back in this era. Can you imagine? And here's another twist about this I want you to think about. If Muslims came to China in the 7th century, why did all these notables come almost many centuries later, almost a millennium later? You thought about that? 651 Christian eras when the Muslims came into China. Look when this stuff started happening. Almost 7 to 10 centuries later. That's amazing. Let's talk about these three figures very quickly. Admiral Zheng He. Between 1405 to 1433, the Ming Dynasty in the beginning wanted to embark on a period of exploration. They wanted to go beyond their borders. And who did they hire? Good old Zheng. He commanded many fleets known to the Chinese as treasure ships. They were huge. You talk about the Royal Caribbean today? It's nothing. He led 7 expeditions sailing to Sumatra, Java, India, Arabian Peninsula, to the east coast of Africa. Can you imagine the size of those ships to do all that? And it's not just that, but they were shipping silk and porcelain. They carried people to distant lands. They returned with spices and exotic animals. To me, I would think it's an elephant, right? It must be huge and must accommodate a lot. And in fact, they say that Admiral Zheng He, during that time, they were so isolated that he actually, with a few Muslims, performed Hajj for the first time in China after they were isolated during his adventures. And the scale of these ships, according to what I've read, were unraveled until the 20th century. Can you imagine these fleets? And that's why it's an irony when the Ming Dynasty had power, had wealth, had the control of the naval forces, they didn't want to expand. It became xenophobic. They were concerned about warriors and conquerors. So here's his adventures. You can see all of them. I'm not going to go into them, but the different years. He went all the way from here to the various parts of the Mughal Empire at the time, the Persian Empire, all the way to Jeddah and did his Hajj there, from what I understand, all the way down to Africa. It's amazing what this one guy could do. And he was put in the fleet, and he was respected and given special honor. And because of him, from what I've read, many of the Muslims living in that dynasty were treated with respect. Although he was a minority because of his work and what he brought to the empire, the emperor, he was given respect along with the Chinese. So in those key positions, he actually brought a good situation for the Muslim Ummah at that time in China. Wang Daiyu, 1580-1650 was the time he was born, and he died. He wrote the first book in the Chinese language about Islam. Don't forget this guy. 1642, during the Ming Dynasty, the veritable explanation of the true religion. It's a Chinese, obviously, in English. And he sparked a Chinese Muslim literature, almost like a renaissance in literature. And here's one of his quotes. Our family has been in China for 300 years. Although we have settled down, we are not forgetful of our origins. Allahu Akbar. He did not forget his origin of a Muslim, that he wrote this book. Why is it important? Again, I brought this point up to you. And I'm trying to give you stuff which is relevant and not irrelevant. I cut out the fat and give you the beef. The book was written 1,000 years after Islam came to China in the 7th century. Why is it important? How come this stuff wasn't done earlier? Again, because up until the Ming Dynasty, the basic Islamic beliefs were passed down generation to generation through the medium of Arabic. There were foreign elements. They were not considered part of mainland China. But with generation after generation, these Muslims intermarried with the Han's Chinese, and they became the Hui Muslims. The Hui Chinese Muslims cannot be differentiated from the Han's Chinese Muslims except when they say, I'm Muslim. You can't tell the difference unless their clothing and through their salah. So this is important. So up until this point, there was no need to write anything. They had the Imams who were learning Arabic and teaching their people. But at this point, Islam was in danger. With the Sinicization or becoming Chinese or Americanization, Islam was in danger of being lost. So the Wang was the first to address this issue. Something very notable, a true torchbearer. He was an innovator. The first Muslim who learned the Chinese classics. He didn't just read the Quran and that was it. He studied history of China, all the schools of thought of Confucianism and Buddhism and what else he got, examined them from a Muslim perspective. And he studied the 100 schools of philosophy. And here's his quote, as I broadened my knowledge, I discovered views which were erroneous, perverse, mutually contradictory, and as different from Muslim religion as night from day. This is Muslim Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Okay? His desire to revitalize the Muslim faith led to 32 original works from the time of his death until 1800. Again, a miniature Chinese Renaissance, a true torchbearer. Lu Qi, not Lu Qi. Lu Qi was the most prolific writer China ever produced. He's like the Tabari of China, a Tabari of China. He spread Islamic knowledge in the Chinese medium, and he wrote 20 volumes. And every source that I read among the Westerners, among Japanese, among Chinese, among the Hispanics who wrote about China, they always refer to one of his 20-volume books that talks about Tang Dynasty, about Song Dynasty, about Ming Dynasty, about Qing Dynasty, about Jin Dynasty. He's covered it in detail with extensive references. He is an amazing, prolific writer, and his best-known Muslim work was Life of the Prophet ﷺ, based upon Tarjuma Mustafa. And that's extant, apparently. I don't know who the author is, but that's what I found in my references. He studied Chinese classics, histories, Islamic sacred writings, Buddhism, Taoism. He was an intellect. He produced works in geography, astronomy, mathematics, mechanics, religion, like an Ibn al-Qayyim of China, if you want to call it. He was a polymath. He was an amazing polymath. Japanese scholar Kawada Rokuro recorded 67 works of Arabic and Persian titles alone that he could find in his studies. The only peculiarity about him, again, you have to take into account what's going on. The only hadith work that he had was of the Shia sect currently in Persia, known as Al-Kafi by this author here, Yaqub al-Qullini. But the Hidayah by Burhanuddin al-Marghinani and Salat al-Masudi by Masud Samarkandi were the Hanafi. Majority of Muslims are Sunni Hanafi in China. Then the Cultural Revolution happened between 1966 to 1976. I'm just giving you little pieces here, a very superficial presentation. Muslims were the focus of national criticism. They had widespread persecution, mosque closings, massacres of thousands upon thousands of Muslims. They shut down masajids and destroyed them. They killed and they did terrible things. Then finally this particular person from the Communist Party introduced reforms in 1978, seeing all the revolts and bloody massacres, that finally around 1980, they allowed the rebuilding of schools and masajids. The government is actually putting a lot of money into this, and minority restrictions were eased. That was another break for the Muslims. So you can see this up and down ebb flow of life throughout the 1300 years. So what's the evolution of the Hui minority? The only two groups I'm going to talk about are the Hui and the Uyghurs. The Hui are the main Muslim Chinese who are not a problem for Beijing. Beijing loves them. They're part of mainland China. There's an interaction. They're like almost a buffer between the Han's Chinese and the Uyghurs. They've been living there. They've integrated into society. And they're actually like Chinese in terms of dress and so forth, but they've maintained their Islam. So these are the steps that were mentioned in the New York Times. The conception stage by Tang Dynasty, Arabs lost their ancestral identities and they were severed from their native lands. This is a review slide. And they started their families in China and increased from 50,000 to 2 million. That's the Tang Dynasty. The adolescent stage was the 14th century, the Semu-Gen. They were given legal citizenship above the hands by the Kublai Khan. We talked about it. And their population suddenly doubled to 4 million. So there were political, military, and social life increase in population. They were multiracial. They spoke individual dialects. The practice of the individual customs, dress, adopted ancestral names, and were a foreign element. The maturity stage, again, the Ming Dynasty, they were non-Chinese who adopted names. You had to give up your Arab names, dress, and you had to marry Chinese. And the Emperor, however, did not expel them or make them reject their faith. You have this handout. I thought it would be interesting. Maybe Sheikh Qazi might find some interest in it, but I can't go into too much detail. There's a guy named Israeli from Jerusalem who's done a lot of work looking at Muslim sects and a lot of papers, in fact, on Muslims in China. This pretty much is a modification of his diagram from this particular article. And basically, I want to go very briefly, again, something that's relevant to you. He defines a sect as that which is defined with its own unique historical background, own unique social and religious practice of various teachings of Chinese Islam. The formation of sects occurred through the centuries, and it reflects a continuum of Chinese Muslims seeking to reassert their religious identity by adoption of developments in the larger Muslim world. Again, what happens in China is effectively what happens abroad. That's the basic point I'm trying to make. The Sino-Muslim development over 1,300 years was a dynamic, continuous process that is recognizably Islamic, yet also adapted to Chinese culture. Just very briefly, Qadim are the so-called the traditional Islam, free of philosophy, alhamdulillah, free of philosophers, located along the coastal regions and northeast. The Sufi sects are the Qadariyya, Kubrawiya, Naqshbandiya, and they have their own subsection of the Khufiyya and the Jahriyya. The Khufiyya are those who recite zikr quietly, and the Jahriyya are those who recite zikr loudly. And there are many, many internal feuds and wars between them during the 17th through the 19th century. In the absence of statistics, the majority of Hui who reside outside the heartlands of Chinese Islam, which I showed the first graph of the major enclaves, they're pretty much Qadims, or traditional Muslims. The historical perspective of Sufism is interesting. They were brought via the Central Asian route I told you about. The Talas River, remember? The very tip of the Xinjiang. They came via that route from Central Asia. So the Central Asians introduced Sufism into China via trade, study, and Hajj. Ibn Battuta, I understand, was a Tunisian Arab traveler in the 14th century. He mentioned meeting an Islamic mystic in Hangzhou. The Kubrawiya were more Shia in character versus the rest of China. And the inception of the Ming Dynasty was brought by an Arab Sufi, Al-Ayyubi. And this is where Sufism is really heavily concentrated in about the 17th century, northwest and Yunnan. Powerful force. They were the driving force behind Muslim uprisings in the 19th century, a lot of bloody wars. Sectarian dynamics were most pronounced within the Sufi orders. They're fighting each other, and they had bloody fights. In terms of world dynamics, which I think is very important for you to appreciate, the Quranic belt outlines the residence of these Sufis. From the 13th to the 19th century, almost 600 years, the vast majority of Sufi tombs and pilgrimage sites where they actually went to these tombs are found over here. Central Asian influence via trade routes defined the Sino-Muslim identity. So whatever was coming through Central Asia into China was influencing the Muslim identity in China, and therefore has a strong Sufi influence. In the late 19th century, an interesting change in event happens in history. We need to make a point of this. The Hajj started taking place via the sea routes, not the land route. So the Muslims of China were no longer going through Central Asia and being influenced by Sufis. They're actually going by boat, the maritime trade. And therefore, what happened was the trade route was less. The contact was limited through Central Asia, and also because the Soviets came in, and the Soviet Union did not allow the Muslims from Xinjiang to cross into Central Asia. So that became a barrier or a wall. The Muslims could not go any further. So in a way, they were cut off from Sufism. They were just cut off. And what happened was, Hajj opened up and the Chinese were now going to the Hijaz. They were going to the Hijaz, to the Middle East. What does that mean? Ma Wanfu, from the Ikhwan group, apparently linked to Ikhwan al-Muslimin, with the Hujjaj, went to Hajj, and a so-called, again, this is the American Western publication, so don't mind the terms. He brought Wahhabi teachings into northwest China in 1892 onward. And suddenly there were 1 million followers, and they outnumbered all the Muslim Sufi orders in the whole of China. So now it becomes traditional Islam, or Wahhabi Islam, if you want to call it. And the main force of China Islamic Association today that's state-approved is Ikhwan al-Muslimin ideology. The emergence of the Salafiyya occurred between this time, shortly about 30 years after Ikhwan formed, and they traced their theological ancestry to whom? None other than Ibn Taymiyyah. This is the Salafiyya. It's a branch of Ikhwan. They spread throughout Northwest and beyond. They're there now. They're all over the place. They accuse the Ikhwan of compromising with Chinese culture. They're not happy with them, so they form their own group. And they're calling for reforms to go back to the original Medina society. That's their call, the Salafiyya. And they're Arabic speaking. They were Arabic dressed. They dressed with their thobes and everything, the burqas and niqabs and everything. And they wear traditional dress, and they're teaching Arabic. And the People's Republic of China does not like it. Beijing is not happy. They see them as unpatriotic and a problem for them. So how did Islam survive? How do we analyze all of this now? How do we put it all together? It's an exceptional history of religious minorities in China. Why is it exceptional history? Because Christianity, according to what I've read, disappeared twice from China. They were unsuccessful. They couldn't impress upon the people with the word of Jesus. Which means that Islam was meant to be a divine religion for all of humanity, but Rabbul Alameen, alhamdulillah. So the Jewish community was also there, about 400, and apparently they assimilated, and now they're extant. They became Chinese, or they became part of them. And that never happened anywhere in the history of the world, and there's this recommendation that we need to look further as to why these Chinese Jews disappeared. That doesn't happen, They disappeared, and that study needs to be done. That's what was suggested in the articles that I read. So why has Islam survived, though? Why did Islam survive in China? There are two main reasons given in my readings. The establishment of communities around masajids. That's a lesson for us. You should always try to be near a masjid. Masjid is the point center of worship and of your identity. Even though they were cut out from the Ming Dynasty for almost centuries, this setup of masajids with the surrounding communities formed the basis of a self-sustaining society. The life and the death of a society is defined by the masajids. And that's what made them survive. That was one explanation given over the centuries. Number two, they always had a constant reference to a foreign land. They didn't owe anything to the Chinese government or to the emperors. They always looked at the foreign land as a source of cultural and religious identification. Yes, there are people in Central Asia who are Muslim. There's Hajj, there's Umrah. And so there's a continual need to reassert itself. That, my dear brothers and sisters, is a nutshell of all of China. I'm going to just change gears because time is tight. I'm going to just touch one more important one. Sheikh Qazi asked me to talk about Xinjiang and what's happening today. And let's just go right to the root of it. They're a separate group of people. They're not the Hui who are located all over China. They're found predominantly in the northwest area. And look how it's situated. It's surrounded by Mongolia, all the ex-Soviet republics, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, India, Kashmir, Nepal. There's no other place on the face of the earth where you have this one piece of land surrounded by almost 12 different countries. Can you imagine the influence in that one area? And China doesn't like it. It's not like saying Canada or Mexico. You get illegals down here and you got Canadians up there. It's not the same thing. They're surrounded by multi-different cultures, and they have their own identity, and they don't really care about the Chinese Beijing, the People's Republic of China. This is the area of focus, and Urumqi is the capital of Xinjiang. Again, you can see all the countries that are surrounding it here. It's a very volatile area, and it's been, subhanAllah, I think it's worse than the Palestinian situation, because we hear about it all the time. They are worse off than the Palestinians. They've been there for centuries. You're talking Palestinians almost 50 years. We need to pray for our brothers over there. They're in the news all the time. They're getting killed and slaughtered all the time. Here's a 1990 photo of Newsweek showing the other China. The restless minorities are testing Beijing. They don't like them because they're pretty much a Turkic community. They have not assimilated into Chinese society, and the Chinese people do not like it. Again, here it is again, and here's the area of focus around all these areas, and here it is of all the countries. You can see how intense it is. It's a huge area. It's a significant desert land, very difficult to live, but it's also a unique region as well. It has a lot of resources, and China doesn't want to lose resources. What are those resources? One unique thing again, because of its proximity to Russia and Mongolia and Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kashmir, India, is a lot of trade routes here. Look at all the trades that are taking place. It's a multi-million-dollar business now in China where people are going back and forth with their trade and goods to different parts of the province. It's good for China's economy. They don't want to lose this piece of land because Xinjiang is calling for their own independent state. They want their own independence. And here what they did was a very massive movement done by the People's Republic of China in 1949. They built a massive railroad system right into the heart of Urumqi, the capital. And what they do is they're mass relocation of the Han Chinese. Mass relocation, just like they're making the Yahud come and take over all of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Same story here. Mass relocation of the Han Chinese, the non-Muslim Chinese, and repopulated them here. And so by this trade route, they've actually threatened the culture of these Muslims living in Uyghur and also of Khazgar I told you about, who've been living there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so you can see, and it's hard to see in this picture, but a lot of train routes and railroad has caused some mass relocation. And now the Hui, the Han Chinese outnumber the Muslims there. So here recently when I was in Boston on a trip, I got this segment from US Today, July 9th. It says, members of the province's Han majority take up arms against the Uyghurs as police struggle for control in China. Here's this Han Chinese with a stick, with spikes sticking out of it. He's going to kill somebody. He's got a little cellular camera to take pictures, And they're out there to kill Muslims. They want to attack the Uyghur properties. And here the Chinese are sent in to control the situation. And you can see here, I'm going to go back here, that you have, I don't know why it's not working. Okay. So here you have people taken away from their homes, the males, and jailed. You're going to have, these Uyghurs are threatened, their children are threatened, they don't know what's going to happen to them. And you have all of these armies coming in by the thousands and trying to control order. And then these are Turkic-speaking ethnic group, 9 million people, a desert oil-rich region, and they resent Han rule. They don't like the Han rule. That's why they're upset. There was a brawl at the toy factory on July 5th between Hans and Uyghurs, and this is how many were killed as of July 22nd before I came here. Almost 200 killed and almost 1,800 injured, just by the tensions. These are going back decades now. The government's lack of action sparked a riot. There's a frustration over government policies. They're trying to close down masajids, control even what the khatibs are saying. They want to get rid of the language of the Uyghurs. There's discrimination against them, even their religion. And they have stopped them using their ethnic language in classrooms. So here they are beating up some sister over here. And this reminds me of Palestine. Here's the sister going right in front of these tanks. And these machines, look at it, it's dramatic from these pictures. And here you'll be shocked at this picture, although I put it small. These are people with hatchets to cut meat and sticks and rods to come and kill Muslims. It's a whole gang of hands. That's a handsful of that. All right. And so here, Masajid, the main mosque in Xinjiang, all Muslims praying, they were forbidden from coming to Jummah prayer, but they brought the barracks and they came to that Jummah prayer. And all the shops are closed, curfews are there, and of course you have the Chinese who pretty much are doing a very bad job of trying to stop one crowd from another, just breaking right through it. So, in summary, and summing up and finishing all of this, what is the China situation today on the international scene? Is it like a good neighbor? Look at the Islamic Empire in green, and look at China over here. China is smacked in the middle of all of these Muslim countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, Kazakhstan, all the ex-Soviet republics. So in a very unique location. So they have to walk a very fine line in terms of how they're taking care of their Muslims. And look at this Uyghur area. Look where it's situated, right among all of these Muslim areas here. What's happening? Foreign investments in Muslim countries now are happening. Diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia happened in 1990. Now students are going to Al-Azhar to study around the 1960s. I have some clips of that. And 10% of the Muslim population occupies 60% of the landmass. The vast majority of China's oil, mineral, nuclear power resources are in Xinjiang. That's why they don't let go of it. The Beijing officials are concerned about ethnic separatism. Why? Because all of the ex-Soviet republics have gotten their independence. Bosnia got its independence. Herzegovina got its independence. They don't want to lose Xinjiang. Because Xinjiang is surrounded by independent states that got their freedom. So now there's more interaction with Muslim countries. And therefore, theoretically, mistreatment of the Uyghur Muslims may alienate trading partners in the Middle East. Allahu Alam. Last point, the Guantanamo Bay. Uyghurs were picked up and thrown in Guantanamo Bay because they were given up by some nomadic tribes in Afghanistan for a U.S. bounty at the time of Al-Qaeda and thrown in jail. These 3 Muslims of 5 were there for almost 5 years. And they were found to be innocent. And they were finally extradited to Albania in 2006. But China still wants them. Here's another 4 Muslims who were just recently given asylum in Bermuda. They were in the jail for almost 7 years. Innocent Muslims who just happened to be caught during the bombing. Again, the Pakistani villagers did a good job. They gave them up for a U.S. bounty. So it doesn't take much to get people to turn you over. Your own Muslims, turn them over. And these poor guys suffered for 4 years. They talked about making fart noise when they did salah and discriminating the Quran and all these, you read this stuff, it's shocking. But they were repatriated, China wants them back, but now they are in Bermuda. The remaining 13 Uyghurs are now they're trying to arrange them to go to the Pacific island of Palau. I will stop here, I'm not going to go too far, I'll go right to the video so I don't waste time. I can just show you briefly some of the Imams I met, some of the masajids. Here's a shoe rack with some kind of statement, I have no idea what it says, unless you're Chinese. Beautiful. Now the masajids are nice because they have a courtyard with pavilions. Those are Chinese-style masajids, and they've taken very good care of their elderly Muslim brothers all along the walls. I've seen in every masjid. There's a place for them to sit with a table to do the sajda. I find that very interesting. They've taken good care of their elders. Here's the Muslim masajid in Xi'an. Carvings of the actual Arabic, carved, not painting or writing, actually indentation of every haraka and every letter in the wood on all the walls of the masajid, going about 3 stories high. Unbelievable. Because the Communist Party does not want any organized book in the Quran, like the Quran, so these Muslims decades earlier, when actually went from Surah Al-Fatiha to Surah Al-Nas, carved in wood. Allahu Akbar. I've never seen it like that in my life. There's a video of that as well. It's a little close up here, just showing you one of the surahs, Lam Yalid wa Lam Yulad, right? Then the translation of that in Chinese at about shoulder height. So from here up, about 2.5 stories is Arabic, and from shoulder height down is all in Arabic letters, and that's what, Chinese letters, which is shown over here. If you look at many of the Muslims that I met, they don't look Chinese in their faces. You know they're a different ethnic group. And mashallah, they have a good diet here, not like the fatty food we have here. Everything is all vegetables, and their dessert is always watermelon. I don't know why. They start with the main meal, then they serve you the salad, and then they serve you watermelon. That was for the whole 2.5 weeks. And here's a guy with scorpions on a skewer, they're alive, and he fries them for you and you can eat them. So I took a picture of that. It was very interesting. They're actually moving their legs. It's quite gory sight. Again, I met another Muslim here. Again, courtyard-style masajids with pavilions surrounded. And a lot of nice kids I met. Here's a kid with a little dagger trying to attack me. I took a picture. His mother was laughing. These beautiful faces of these kids are very innocent. And here, this is really stays in my mind. I went to Newji Mosque in Beijing, the main mosque in Beijing. I took a picture of them. They're sticking their heads out. They came for Salah. And look at the face of happiness. They don't know who the heck I am. From Brownie, you know? From Brownie from NYC, New York City. Look at their faces. SubhanAllah, just a smile to see another Muslim who they can't even communicate with and they have no way of saying anything. Look at that. I'll never forget the picture of this woman. SubhanAllah. And I met, again, look at their faces. They don't look Chinese to me. There's some kind of mix in there. And in this particular khutbah I went to, there were about 6 imams. One took a turn to give the khutbah, another did the Arabic, in alhamdulillah wa nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu, and the third one led the prayer. So there were a whole gang of imams, which I didn't understand. Here all sitting there, 4 of them. And that's the minbar, the mihrab. So it was very interesting, you know. And here's the guy who did all the Arabic. And I met some families there too. A little family come with a child, 1-child policy. For Muslims, it's 2 or 3. So they might be Hui, they look Chinese. I call them Hui Chinese. And here's a guy in a butcher shop right in the masjid, right on the side. And I'm hanging out, they got a lot of bikes there. And this kid in a little like a shopping cart was like shocked to look at me. Like, who the hell are you? I noticed one thing, the Chinese love to stare at you because remember, they've been closed off from the world, from the communist rule. They're looking like, where'd you come from? I'm with my mom and these 2 people. They please stop. They're taking 8 people taking our pictures. They've never seen brownies before. Here's some Muslims selling watermelon, little beards over here. And the alleyways are very narrow. This is in Xi'an, a predominantly Muslim area where the first masjid was built, right? In 1651. I'm hanging out there. Look at all these Muslim women. Nicely dressed among the little child over there. And, beautiful faces. Just look at them. They're all smiling. Just, people I will never see again in my life. And this again, Xi'an. Many, many masajids I've been to. And, of course, the People's Republic of China. And I got into the whole Kung Fu mood myself. This is back there is where Nixon and Mao Zedong actually were on stage, and I put some Chinese on my kids. They all learned some Chinese from me. I met this particular guy doing calligraphy. SubhanAllah, look at him. He's one of the main, he apparently comes to ISNA. I don't know that. Someone told me they recognized him. Haji something, I don't know. There you go. And he was there in Beijing, and SubhanAllah was doing some beautiful work. I just had to, there's so much of it. I just wanted to show you a little part of it. And, I'm sorry? I'm looking at the timer, that's why. Is that okay? Can you guys appreciate it? I don't want to make it big. I'm looking at the timing here. So if you can look at it. It's a beautiful work he's done of the ayats of the Quran. Okay. Okay. I'm going to jump here now in a second. So bear with me. This is the masjid, and you can see we're walking outside. A typical Chinese masjid has a courtyard, walls built around it, has a courtyard, and it has these little provinces set up within it. So it's very interesting. And here are those ladies I told you about. My camera's shaking. They don't know me yet. When I got with the camera, they just freaked out. Oh, my God. So here they are looking, and they're just astonished to see a sight like this. Where are these people coming from, And so I was actually at a Muslim meeting. That's why I ended up going there. And everything was halal food, everything I ate, so I was very fortunate. And these are actually beggars, I found out later on. See, they're dressed differently. They don't look like, they could be non-Muslims, I don't know. But look at the dress there. They're not like the other Muslims I showed you. I don't know if I could raise this up a little higher, the volume. Is there a mic? Oh, okay. Obviously, I will use my own mic. Let me see if I can. Is there another one there? We can, yeah, in the meantime, just use it. So we're walking through the court. Here's a beggar. See, she's hiding, and she just took her hand back in. We're walking down the courtyard, the hallway. And again, it's like a wall with a courtyard with these typical Chinese, these up and down kind of, I don't know what you call it, but the rooftops, very unique. And then the women's section and men's section separates at this point. So the men go to the left, and women go to the right. And there's a zakat box down there in green, and these people are waiting to have donations given if you want to give sadaqah. And this is going inside the masjid. So I'm just going to let it play. And you can see this, they're doing some construction work over here. And here are the Muslims. There's another brother hanging out over there, doing some rap tajweed, I don't know. And here are all these Muslims sitting outside. You can see the faces here. Some of them don't look like, the typical mainland Chinese. And the khutbah is going on. Do you have a mic there? I'm going to just put it a little bit here. You can translate anytime you want. Look at the beautiful architectural work of the masjid. SubhanAllah, it's just beautiful. I can't show you everything, but I'm just trying to give you an idea. It's all over. It's just breathtaking to see that. Again, just bear with me again. Again, I'm trying to show you the architectural work, the beautiful writings of the Arabic, the Quran, ayats on the walls. Again, the one giving the khutbah and the one who's the Imam later on in the salah, they're all different. The prayer is right behind him. It's beautiful, written with all kinds of Arabic designs and the Quranic ayats. I enjoyed the khutbah. I had no idea he said that. And this guy got up to give the Arabic part. Listen carefully. That's where he was the member. And just showing a picture of the Muslims praying, and that again the different designs and the Arabic inscripts all over. It's one of the most beautiful, the main masjid actually in Beijing. It's beautiful. I mean, this does not do justice, the videotape, as to what I saw. And I think I thought I saw Siraj Wahaz there. Maybe Sheikh Qazi will be interested to see it. I could have sworn I saw Siraj Wahaz there. There's people in prayer. This is at the time of zikr. It's interesting. After Salah, they were reciting Quran. I don't know why. They're taking turns reading Quran. They read Quran and make dua. Read Quran and make dua. Read Quran and make dua. I didn't understand that. I was just watching. It was very interesting. What happened? You can hear them reciting Quran now. Each Imam was taking a turn reciting. Watch, you'll see. And remember, these are people who speak Chinese with symbols, not like you can speak Chinese to French to English. Imagine them reading Quran. It puts me to shame. But Allahu Akbar, he's They're those beggars again. I call them beggars because they were very different from all the other sisters I saw there. And they're sitting in the men's section, so go figure. The men in the back, they're the only ones who were sitting there. It's kind of odd. I'm trying to show you the setup there, so just bear with me for a while. I'm trying to show you the people. That's my whole focus. The whole focus is to show you the people. There's George Clooney, is it? From, yeah. Hi, I'm just... Just watch this. Again, I'm just trying to show you the decoration. And I'm facing back outwards. Here's some of the Muslims sitting there. There's a sister I took a picture of earlier with her husband and the child. They're sitting back there. They're just very calm people, They all, it's a beautiful masjid. So I'm giving the dimensions now by showing you the back part of the masjid. See? I thought it was this Raj Wahazir. I could have been wrong. I'm sorry. I'm serious. It's after Jummah, they were studying Quran. They're all taking turns. After the Salah. I had enough of this. I had enough of this. Thank you. All right. This is the courts again. We're coming outside from the men's side. I'm just showing you the construction of the masajid. And there's a donation box. Again, a lot of construction work going on. It's supported by the government. So a lot of government money is going in, trying to accommodate the minority Muslims. But we are the largest. And here come the sisters. And I say salam to them. They're dressed differently than those beggars, remember? They look very differently. They're begging him. He's yelling at him. You gotta get out. I'm walking in the back here. This is not to do with the sun, but just a few seconds here. I'm walking through the smell is very unique. I won't say it in a bad way. It's a very unique, funky smell, okay? And there they are. Look at it. Look at this. Look at this. I am amazed. Just keep watching. Just keep watching this. I know you had a good appetite of steak, some of you, but just look what happens. Look at this. Look at this. I was shocked. I was shocked, man. Look what happens. Look what happens now. No. Look. They're frying. Look at that. And I asked them, how come the scorpion doesn't kill you? Because when you heat it, it kills the protein and denatures it. It won't poison you. They asked me to eat it. Look at this. Look at this. Look, they're putting stuff on it. Look, see? A little spicy there. I have an interview here which will pretty much summarize what I just talked about. It's an interview with an Imam. He speaks Arabic but very low tone, and the one after inshallah is very clear. That's the one you got to see. But let me just get you to this real quickly here. It is in Xi'an, and you can see, I'm trying to get to it. All these kids are happy to see me. I just walk, they all look in the camera. I can even flip them to the screen so they can see themselves. Those are all excited. Did I see anything like it? And they were walking into a courtyard again. You can see all the different areas, the wudu areas on the side, all these canopy-like structures. This is one of the old masajids in the area here. I'm sorry. Where's the... Still click on the screen. I'm just going to see? Okay. So just showing the outside. Let me get to the heart of the matter.
This is the look at the library.
Listen to the interview carefully. He pretty much summarizes everything I talked about in my talk. That's what I want you to see.
The settlement from Arabia, Persia,
He's translated from Arabic to English. Allah's are graduates. They speak Fusha Arabic.
Those people who came in here, being settled, a lot of them settled here, get married Chinese girls and stayed in the area, and they built the mosque.
Again, it's very dark and there's no light because the walls have Arabic written on it. So I have to use my night light to get the picture.
Spread from Xinjiang gradually to the rest part of China. At the time, there is about 60,000 Muslims in Xinjiang. And there are 15 mosques in Xinjiang itself.
Here's the wall I told you about, all the writings of Allah's names. And you can see how they preserve the Quran on the walls. Because the communist government does not allow Quran in the masjid until 1980. Look at what the work's been done. These are actually engraved. They're not writings, but they're actually carved into the wood of the Sifat of Allah. And here's the Quran. Look at the walls. SubhanAllah. I mean, look at the work. It's amazing how they're etched in. Every harakah, every harf is just amazing. You can read the surahs. Look at the walls. Look at the walls carefully. Look at the work. Look at this work. It's amazing. Look how high these walls go. All the top is Arabic. The bottom is Chinese. It's amazing. This is in Xi'an. وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا. You know, it's just amazing.
These are the number of the ayat in the circle?
They even put the ayat number in the circle, yes. Each ayat in the circle tells you what number it is. And that was just amazing. Again, the whole masajid. I'm just going to jump here again, because the time is going on us real quickly here. Here's a sister serving some kind of soup, Muslim sister. I don't know what she was serving, but there's some kind of a soup. I didn't try it, no. I'm trying to get to an area. There's a guy here selling corn, another Muslim brother I ran into. All right, that's not a Muslim. That's a hands. That's a hands Chinese. MashaAllah. I'm getting right to the interview here. Listen carefully, because I'm sure those who speak Arabic, you'll appreciate it more, I think. Echo, I'm sorry.
Haytham, can we get some time for Q&A?
That's fine. So I'll stop here. So I hope that was beneficial to you guys. It took a lot of work behind the scenes, but I want to put it. So I hope that was beneficial to you, and bismillah, you will remember your brothers and sisters in China. There's a whole community out there we need to think about. So I guess this Q&A. Again, I'm only going to speak from what I know in terms of literature and my personal experience. Don't expect me to answer all the questions. Well, in my tours, I basically were going to the Jamia, the main masajid in all the 6 provinces. So the main people I met were the Hui. I really couldn't, I couldn't tell, I couldn't differentiate between Vietnamese and them. But obviously it's a tourist kind of area also, and it's supported by the government. And they want to show people like me who coming in the best of the best. Because it is government massages. All of them are government run. So Allah. He asked about the Vietnamese people who migrated to China. I said, I really don't know their status there.
I just heard a comment about the Admiral Zheng He. He was, like you said, he had large ships. Actually, he had a fleet bigger than the Spanish Armada, and his ships were large enough to import giraffes from Africa. So you can imagine, they had the entire animal inside the hull of the ship. So they were 3 to 4 times larger than the Spanish ship. And even more interesting is, and this is, I don't know how much authentic this is, he was a Chinese, and he was a giant among men. Literally, he was about 8 to 2 inches tall.
Allah. Any questions from the sisters? Back there? Yes. If you can speak up a little, please. Inshallah, I will do that. Inshallah, I'll ask Brother Haytham.
Two things. One is a comment and one is a question. First of all, Jazakallah khair, barakallah fi. That was a really wonderful presentation. I benefited from every piece of it and enjoyed it very much. Jazakallah khair. Just one comment regarding some of the material presented. I saw that when we spoke about the first, I would say, the first contemporary meeting between the Muslim Chinese and the Muslims in Arabia, basically during the Hajj time and the Hijazis, the term Ikhwan was used during the late 19th century, means 18 something, as Ikhwan reflecting the same ideology that we have today. As a matter of fact, the reason they associate Ikhwan, that term, back in the 1800s, with the Wahhabi movement, because the Ikhwan, they were the Wahhabi, the actual Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia, what they call them Wahhabis. Back then, those people in Saudi Arabia, they used to call them Ikhwan man ta'Allah, which means those are the brothers who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who are obedient to Allah, these are our brothers. So they were called back then Ikhwan man ta'Allah, way before Hassan al-Banna established actually the current movement of Ikhwan Muslimin. So I believe the term Ikhwan back then is not the one that we know today. So that's why they associate with the Wahhabis. That's one thing. Second, when we spoke about the China and being xenophobic and just basically controversial in a country or society, going back on itself and so on, I believe this is coming from a Eurocentric point of view. In reality, there were some books that came recently, just in the past few years actually. I read 2 books, one by a contemporary author, young actually, scholar, historian. His name is Kenneth Pomeranz, and his book was The Great Divergence. And it's a parallel history discussion between Europe and China during those years. And if we see even as an evidence for that, they were not really closed society or country. When we spoke about the naval commander, Zheng He, in the 1400, actually 1400 something, that was exactly the time preceding the first expedition that came out from Spain. Columbus came out 1492. And as a matter of fact, the second book that I read about the Chinese expeditions of Zheng He himself proved that the Chinese naval actually expedition reached the coast of California during those times. So they came to America, which is the US today, way before even the Europeans arrived. The reason now why the West started rising and the rest starts falling, of course, is because of just subhanAllah, opportunities, chances, and because they arrived first. The Chinese, they were self-sufficient with the resources they had in China, but the Europeans, they were taking right now the gold and the silver of, subhanAllah, the locals of Americas, and then ship it back to Europe, basically stripping these countries from their resources. But the Chinese, they were self-sufficient with what they had, until of course, they ran out of the major resources, and the Europeans started emerging as big society. Wallahu ta'ala, just actually
Barakallah fi. The only thing I didn't mention was about Marco Polo also. He went and he actually described what he saw in Beijing. So jazakumullah khair for your attention. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.